I always believed in a mother's unconditional love. I thought I knew my daughter, Sarah, better than anyone on earth. We'd been through so much together, joys and sorrows, laughter and tears, unspoken understanding, and the rare, yet inevitable arguments. My quiet life in this old, beloved house, where every floorboard creaked with memories, seemed unshakable. I was certain that the foundation of this life, beyond the house itself, was an unbreakable bond with my only daughter. But then, one ordinary Thanksgiving day, she uttered words that shattered not only my faith, but the entire reality in which I lived. She said, "Mom, did you like the lake house I gave you?" And I had never received any house. The autumn light, soft and golden, streamed through the leaves of the old maple outside my window, painting my living room in amber hues. The cozy scent of pumpkin pie and spices mingled with the subtle aroma of dry wood from the fireplace. Thanksgiving. For me, it had always been a day less about an elaborate feast and more about quiet, deep gratitude for all that I possessed. For my home, for the memories these walls held, and, of course, for my family. Sarah, my daughter, with her perfectly styled hair and fashionable suit, sat on the old sofa that I'd upholstered before she was even born. Next to her was Mark, her husband, with his perpetually wide smile that, for some reason, always felt a little insincere. And my grandson, James, an awkward teenager with a mop of dark hair and eyes exactly like my late husband's, sat engrossed in his phone. He had grown quiet and withdrawn in recent years, and it worried me. We had just finished dinner, the turkey I'd been cooking since morning, cranberry sauce from my mother's recipe, crisp green beans. Everything was as it always was, familiar and peaceful. My heart was filled with that warm, slightly aching tenderness that comes with knowing your loved ones are near. I was just about to suggest a game of chess to Mark when Sarah, adjusting the sleeve of her expensive blazer, casually, almost carelessly, dropped the words, "Mom, do you like it by the lake? You know, I specifically chose a quiet spot for you, away from the hustle and bustle of the city." The spoon with which I had just been stirring sugar into my teacup froze in midair. My breath caught in my throat. What? What lake? What house? I slowly lowered the spoon, making it clink against the porcelain, and the sound seemed deafening in the sudden silence. I looked at Sarah, trying to understand if it was a joke. But her face was absolutely serious, even a little strained. Mark, who had been animatedly telling James something, suddenly fell silent and quickly averted his gaze. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" My voice came out softer than I expected, with a barely perceptible hoarseness. Something cold and alien began to clench inside me. Sarah frowned slightly, as if I hadn't understood her, or worse, was trying to argue with her. "Well, about the house. By Lake Middleton. I gave it to you a couple of years ago. Remember? We talked about it. Or did we not? You even visited a couple of times." "A couple of times?" Me? My memory, which had never failed me, frantically sifted through the past few years. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not only had I never been to any lake house, but I also didn't even know that Sarah had ever dealt with such a property. My world, cozy and predictable, suddenly swayed like an old sailboat in a storm. "Sarah, I never received any house," I said slowly, each word difficult to utter. The cold from within was already spreading through my veins, enveloping my heart. This was not just a misunderstanding. This was something far more sinister. Mark cleared his throat, drawing attention. "Eleanor, Sarah means, it was a kind of, well, an investment project. We put it in your name for tax reasons, you see? And to make everything legal, so to speak. But we can, of course, use it too." He tried to smile, but his smile seemed strained, and his eyes darted nervously. Sarah added, avoiding my gaze. "Yes, Mom, it's all very complicated. So much hassle with the paperwork. But don't worry, it's yours, of course. It's just that for now we're using it. For vacations. And for other needs." Other needs. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. The silence in the living room became unbearable. I felt the weight not only of their gazes, but also of unspoken words, of lies that seemed to swirl in the air. My grandson James, who had been absorbed in his phone, looked up. His eyes darted from his mother to his father, then settled on me. There was confusion in them, and something else, something akin to fear. I had always taught Sarah honesty. From childhood. The truth, however bitter, is always better than a lie, Eleanor, my mother often said, and I carried that conviction throughout my life. I believed in the unshakable nature of family ties, in the sanctity of a mother's love, in the absolute trust that should exist between parents and children. And now, sitting in my own home, I felt these beliefs crumble, turning to dust. In recent years, I had noticed subtle changes in Sarah. She had become more secretive, more preoccupied with money, with status. Her visits grew shorter, and her conversations more superficial. I attributed it to her busyness, to the demands of modern life, to the fact that children grow up and create their own worlds. But this was something entirely different. This was a stab in the back, a betrayal that I couldn't comprehend, couldn't accept. By evening, after Sarah, Mark, and James had left, leaving behind only a pile of empty plates and an awkward emptiness, I sat alone in the silence. My heart hammered somewhere in my throat, and my mind frantically searched for explanations. Maybe I really had forgotten something? Perhaps my old age was finally catching up to me? But no, the feeling of absolute clarity, that this had never happened, was too strong. I stood up, my legs feeling like cotton. I needed to find confirmation. Any mention at all. I rushed to the old bureau where all my important papers were kept: birth certificates, marriage licenses, utility bills, letters. I sifted through yellowed envelopes, old photographs, tax returns. Nothing. Not a single word, not a single receipt, not a single document confirming the existence of any lake house. The more I searched, the stronger the icy grip inside me became. I was being deceived. My own daughter was deceiving me. And this realization was far more painful than any material loss. The phone call to Claire, my old friend, was almost instinctive. She had always been my voice of reason, sharp but loyal. "Claire," I said, and my voice trembled. "I think I'm losing my mind. Or Sarah is." I told her everything, carefully choosing my words, trying not to sound paranoid. Claire listened in silence, which was unusual for her. When I finished, her deep, husky chuckle came from the other end of the line. "Ellie," she said, "you're not losing your mind at all. It just sounds like your daughter has decided she's found a new gold mine. And that gold mine is you. If I were you, I wouldn't cry. I'd put on my Sherlock hat. And I'd dig deeper. Much deeper." The night was long and merciless. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, which seemed infinitely distant in the darkness. Sleep wouldn't come. Sarah and Mark's words echoed in my head, intertwining with the clinking of the spoon and my son-in-law's strained smile. Investment project, tax reasons, paperwork complexities. Each of these phrases sounded like a carefully honed falsehood, like a brick in the wall of lies they seemed to be building around me. I felt uneasy. Not because of some mythical house, but because my own daughter was capable of such deceit. Most of all, it wasn't the absence of a house that troubled me, but the absence of truth. In the morning, I felt broken, yet imbued with a new, cold resolve. Claire's words, "Play Sherlock," rang in my ears. My Sherlock Holmes had never worn deerstalker hats, but I had always prided myself on my observational skills and my ability to get to the bottom of things. Usually, I applied this to solving crossword puzzles or finding missing socks. Now, the stakes were higher. I decided to start with Sarah. Perhaps, if I approached her calmly, without accusations, she would explain everything. After all, she was my daughter. I called her the next day. "Sarah, dear," I began as casually as possible, though my heart was pounding like crazy. "Forgive me, I'm still thinking about what you said about the lake house. I truly don't remember anything. Perhaps you could bring me the documents? Or at least the address, so I could look it up on maps." A pause hung on the other end, long and uncomfortable. I could hear background noise. Sarah was likely at work. "Mom, what are you talking about?" she finally replied, her voice slightly irritated. "I told you, it's complicated." "The address?" "Well, it's far away. There's no point in you going there now. And the documents. Mark has them." He's busy right now, he has a big deal. Let's not talk about it, okay? Later, sometime later, I'll tell you everything. I felt the tension in my body rise. Later. That later sounded like never. But Sarah, it's my house, as you say, I tried to insist, keeping the tremor out of my voice. I should know what's happening with it. Mom, please. Her voice grew louder, with a hint of hysteria. Don't start. You're not going to complicate things now, are you? I tried to do something nice for you. I wanted to surprise you. And you're just... I don't have time right now, Mom. We'll talk later. She quickly said goodbye and hung up. I slowly lowered the phone, feeling stunned. She didn't just withhold information, she went on the defensive, accusing me of complicating things. This was not the behavior of a loving daughter who wanted to alleviate her mother's concerns. This was the behavior of someone hiding something. My suspicions solidified. It pained me to realize that Sarah, my only daughter, could be like this. I had always considered her honest and straightforward, perhaps a little self-centered at times, but never capable of outright deception. Or had I been so blind? I recalled minor incidents when Sarah forgot to repay borrowed money, or when she exaggerated her achievements while subtly diminishing others. I had always overlooked them, excusing her youthful idealism, and then the stress of adult life. But now these small details formed a disturbing picture. I dialed Claire's number again. My friend, as always, was home. Well, Sherlock, found anything? She asked instead of a greeting, her voice sounding a little tired. I told her about the conversation with Sarah, about her evasive answers and irritation. Claire drawled. Just as I thought. Things are heating up. You know, Ellie, when people start acting like that, it almost always means they have something to hide. And your Sarah, it seems, is no exception. But what should I do, Claire? I whispered. I don't know how to act. She's my daughter. I don't want to. I don't want to fight. Fight? Claire scoffed. You're already at war, Ellie. You just haven't realized it yet. You need to go to the county records office. All property transactions are public. You can simply request information under your name. Or by address, if you can find it. It's your right, Ellie. And your only way to find out the truth. Her words were sharp, but there was undeniable logic in them. Public records. Of course. Why hadn't I thought of it myself? I had been a history teacher. I was trained to seek out facts. I thanked Claire, and this time, there was not just irony in her voice, but warm support. I hung up, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of not being completely lost. I might be an old woman, but I was not helpless. And I wasn't going to let anyone play with my love and trust. I would find this house. And I would find the truth. The upcoming trip to the county office felt like an expedition into uncharted territory. My heart clenched with anxiety, but at the same time, a faint, stubborn spark of determination ignited within me. I was ready for what I would find. Or, more importantly, for what I wouldn't find. And that understanding gave me a strange sense of strength. The drive to the county records office was surprisingly short, yet it felt like a journey to a different world. The familiar autumn landscape of New England, with its fiery maples and sleepy towns, seemed to recede as I approached the sterile, bureaucratic building. It was a nondescript place, a brick edifice that blended into the background, a silent repository of untold stories and forgotten truths. My hands, gripping the steering wheel, were trembling slightly, but beneath the apprehension, a new kind of resolve had settled in my chest. Claire's words had cut through my emotional fog, leaving behind a stark, undeniable truth I had to know. Inside, the air was cool and hushed, smelling faintly of old paper and dust. A kind-faced woman with spectacles perched on her nose greeted me from behind a worn wooden counter. I explained my unusual request, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm Eleanor Vance, I began, and I believe there might be some property registered under my name, a lake house that I don't seem to have any records for. My daughter mentioned it, but I'm trying to piece things together. The last part felt like a flimsy excuse, but the woman simply nodded, accustomed, perhaps, to the peculiarities of human memory or family disputes. She guided me to a row of computer terminals, explaining how to search the public database. My fingers, surprisingly clumsy, typed my name into the search bar. With each click of the mouse, my heart pounded a little harder, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. The screen flickered, and then a list of properties appeared. My breath hitched. There it was. An address in Lake Middleton. A property listed under Eleanor Vance. A wave of dizzying relief, quickly followed by confusion, washed over me. So, it did exist. I hadn't imagined it. But why had I no knowledge of it? Why had Sarah and Mark been so evasive? I clicked on the entry, and a cascade of documents unfolded on the screen. There was the initial purchase deed, dated nearly 3 years ago, clearly listing me as the buyer. A genuine gift, it seemed, at first glance. My eyes scanned for more details, a sense of cautious optimism stirring within me. Then, my gaze caught a subsequent document, dated just 2 months after the initial purchase. It was a power of attorney, signed with what looked like my signature, granting Sarah and Mark full control over the property. And then a deed of transfer, moving ownership from Eleanor Vance to Sarah and Mark Middleton, citing the power of attorney. The dates were close, suspiciously so. The words blurred before my eyes, but their meaning became agonizingly clear. It wasn't a gift to me that they were managing. It was a gift from me, obtained through what could only be described as a sophisticated form of theft. They had bought it in my name, then almost immediately transferred it to theirs, using what must have been a forged signature on a power of attorney. And I, in my trusting ignorance, had known nothing. My vision swam. I felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. The sterile office, the quiet hum of computers, the gentle rustle of papers, all of it faded into a distant murmur. All I could see was the cold, hard print on the screen, detailing the meticulously planned betrayal. The pain that ripped through me was not just the sting of financial loss, though that was certainly there. It was the deeper, more profound agony of knowing that my own flesh and blood, my only daughter, had orchestrated such a deceit. It was a betrayal of trust so fundamental, so absolute, that it felt like a physical blow. It was as if a part of my very soul, the part that believed in the goodness of my child, had been ripped away. My mind raced back to Sarah's words, her feigned concern, Mark's glib explanations. They hadn't merely lied, they had constructed an elaborate charade, a web of deceit for years. While I lived my quiet life in my modest home, they had been enjoying a gift that was never truly mine, built on a foundation of lies. A tear, hot and unwelcome, traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol. A symbol of everything I thought our relationship was, now shattered into 1,000 pieces. I felt a cold anger begin to simmer beneath the surface of my grief. This wasn't just about a lake house anymore. This was about my dignity, my truth, and the brutal, undeniable fact that the daughter I loved had chosen to betray me. I printed out the documents, my hands still shaking. Each page felt heavy, laden with the weight of shattered trust. As I walked out of the office, the autumn light no longer seemed golden and soft. It felt harsh, exposing. The world around me had not changed, but my perception of it, and of the people I held dearest, had irrevocably shifted. I had found the truth, as Claire had urged. But the truth was a venomous thing, and it had bitten deep. The drive home was a blur of muted colors and indistinct shapes. The familiar roads, once comforting, now seemed to twist and turn, mirroring the labyrinthine path my thoughts were taking. Each printed document resting on the passenger seat felt like a lead weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The cold, sterile facts laid bare on paper painted a picture of calculated deception, a masterpiece of manipulation orchestrated by the very people I trusted most. My own daughter. I walked into my quiet house, the silence no longer peaceful but deafening. It echoed the hollowness in my heart. I dropped the papers on the kitchen table, their rustle sounding like dry leaves in a cold wind. My gaze fell upon a photograph on the fridge, a younger Sarah, beaming, her arm wrapped around my waist. A pang, sharp and agonizing, twisted inside me. Was that smile always a mask? Had I been so naive, so blind, to miss the signs? I made myself a cup of tea, a ritual that usually brought comfort, but today the warmth of the mug in my hands did little to thaw the ice around my soul. I reread the documents, scrutinizing every date, every signature. The power of attorney. My name, scrawled in a way that almost looked like mine, but upon closer inspection, lacked the distinctive flourish of my E. They hadn't just taken a house, they had stolen my identity, my consent, my dignity. The anger began to bubble, a slow, hot lava rising through the grief. It was an unfamiliar, unwelcome guest, yet it felt strangely empowering. This wasn't just a mistake, an oversight. This was a deliberate act, planned and executed with cold precision. And the realization that Sarah had played such a central role in it was a corrosive acid, eating away at the very fabric of my maternal love. I picked up the phone, my finger hovering over Sarah's number. My first instinct was to unleash a torrent of fury, to demand answers, to watch her squirm. But years of teaching, of cultivating patience and strategy, held me back. I needed to approach this not with raw emotion, but with the cold, hard logic they had used against me. I needed to see her face, to look into her eyes, and gauge the depth of her deception. The next day, I called Sarah, my voice calm, almost unnervingly so. "Sarah," I said, "can you come over? I need to talk to you about something important. Something about the house." There was a slight hesitation, a barely perceptible shift in her tone. "Mom? What about it? Is everything okay?" "Just come over," I repeated, my voice firm. "We need to talk. Alone." She agreed, her voice laced with a newfound caution. The stage was set. When Sarah arrived, she looked impeccable as always. A silk scarf around her neck, a designer bag slung over her shoulder. She smelled faintly of expensive perfume, a stark contrast to the scent of old paper and betrayal that still clung to me. She tried to give me a quick hug, but I stiffened, barely returning the embrace. She pulled back, a slight frown creasing her perfectly smooth forehead. "Mom, what's going on? You sound strange. Is it about the house? Did you finally decide to visit it?" She attempted a light laugh, but it fell flat. I led her to the kitchen table, where the printed documents lay scattered like fallen leaves after a storm. I gestured to them, my hand steady. "Sit down, Sarah." She sat, her eyes darting from me to the papers, her composure slowly cracking. The color drained from her face as she recognized the headings, the dates, the names. Her hands, resting on the table, began to tremble. "Mom, what is this?" Her voice was a whisper, a stark contrast to her usual confident tone. "This, Sarah," I said, my voice low and steady, "is the truth. The truth about the gift you gave me. The truth about the investment project and the tax reasons. The truth about a power of attorney that bears my forged signature, allowing you and Mark to transfer ownership of a house that was supposedly mine into your names." Her eyes widened, brimming with a mixture of fear and something else, a flicker of guilt, quickly masked by indignation. "Forged? Mom, what are you saying? You signed that. Don't you remember? We went to the notary. I explained everything." She was already shifting into defensive mode, her voice rising. "No, Sarah," I countered, my voice cutting through her escalating denial. "I remember nothing of the sort. I have never signed a power of attorney for that property. And this signature is not mine. Not truly." Tears sprang to her eyes, instant and theatrical. "Mom, how can you accuse me of such a thing? After everything I've done for you. After all the sacrifices Mark and I have made. We were just trying to help you, to secure your future. We had some financial difficulties, yes, but the house was always meant for you, eventually. We just needed to manage it for a while." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. It was a performance, a well-rehearsed act designed to appeal to my maternal instincts, to evoke pity and forgiveness. But the anger in me was too strong, too cold to be swayed. I had seen this act before, in smaller ways, throughout her life. The convenient tears, the swift shift to victimhood. "Financial difficulties?" I pressed, ignoring her sobs. "So you admit you needed the money? And the house, which was supposedly mine, became your solution? While I, the supposed owner, lived in ignorance." She slowly lowered her hands, her eyes red, but I saw the defiance hardening behind the tears. It was temporary, Mom. We were going to give it back. When things got better. Mark had some bad investments. We were in a hole. We didn't want to worry you. So you chose to deceive me instead? I asked, the bitterness thick in my voice. You chose to lie to my face, to manipulate my trust, to steal what you claimed was a gift? What kind of daughter does that, Sarah? Her shoulders slumped, the pretense of innocence finally giving way to a weary, resentful admission. It wasn't stealing, Mom. It was borrowing. We just needed time. And besides, it was your name on the deed, remember? We were just managing it. Managing it by collecting rent, perhaps? I asked, a new, sharp edge to my voice. I hadn't looked into that yet, but the thought had already occurred to me. The idea of them profiting from my supposed property while claiming financial hardship was like another twist of the knife. Sarah flinched, her eyes widening again. She avoided my gaze, looking anywhere but at me. The confirmation was unspoken, yet clear as day. My daughter, my only child, had not only deceived me but had actively profited from her deception, all while maintaining the facade of the loving, successful daughter. The pain was unbearable, but in its wake, a steel resolve was beginning to forge itself within me. The mask had finally slipped, revealing a face I barely recognized. The unspoken confirmation of the rental income hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. Sarah, usually so adept at deflection and theatrical displays, had no retort. Her silence, a rare occurrence, was more damning than any confession. She averted her gaze, nervously picking at a loose thread on her expensive scarf, a clear tell of her discomfort. The image of her affluent life, the designer clothes, the perfect facade, suddenly seemed grotesque, built on a foundation of lies and my unsuspecting generosity. So, while you were struggling with these financial difficulties, you were also collecting rent from a property that you claimed was mine, but conveniently managed yourselves? I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the maternal warmth that had once been so natural. The words tasted like ash. And all this time, I was sitting here, worrying about you, thinking you were just a busy, successful young woman, trying to make your way. Sarah finally looked up, her eyes flashing with a mix of shame and resentment. It wasn't like that, Mom. We needed the money. Mark, he had some bad investments, truly. It was just a temporary solution. We planned to tell you, eventually, when everything was stable again. Temporary? I scoffed, a dry, bitter sound. 3 years, Sarah. 3 years of temporary management, and me, none the wiser. Did it ever occur to you that if you were truly in trouble, you could have asked me for help? Instead of stealing from me? Her face hardened. The tears were gone, replaced by a defensive anger. It wasn't stealing. And you wouldn't have understood, Mom. You're so traditional. You don't understand the pressures of our world, the way things work. We just handled it. Handled it, I repeated slowly, the word a poison in my mouth. By lying. By forging my signature. By profiting from a deception. I shook my head, a deep weariness settling over me. The daughter sitting across from me was a stranger, her familiar features twisted by greed and evasion. Just then, the front door creaked open, and James walked in. He must have used his spare key. He paused in the entryway, sensing the tension, his eyes darting between Sarah and me, then settling on the scattered papers on the table. His expression shifted, from youthful nonchalance to something troubled and observant. He had always been a sensitive boy, and I knew he wasn't as oblivious as his parents liked to believe. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice hesitant. Sarah quickly composed herself, forcing a strained smile. "Yes, honey. Just talking to Grandma about some old family photos." She made a move to sweep the documents off the table, but I put my hand over them, stopping her. "No, Sarah," I said, meeting James's curious gaze. "We're not talking about old photos. We're talking about a lake house." James's eyes widened slightly. He looked at his mother, then at me. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition? Understanding? "The lake house?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The one Dad bought last year, that he said was bringing in a lot of money?" Sarah gasped, her head whipping around to stare at her son. Her face was a mask of furious alarm. James, what are you talking about? Your father didn't buy any house last year. But the damage was done. James, innocent in his honesty, had unwittingly confirmed my suspicions about the rental income and the extent of their financial dealings with the property. He had also revealed Mark's direct involvement in advertising its profitability, a stark contrast to Sarah's claims of temporary management. I looked at Sarah, a cold triumph mixed with profound sadness in my heart. Bringing in a lot of money, James? I asked gently, encouraging him, trying to make him feel safe to speak. Do you know anything about that? James, sensing the shift in the atmosphere and perhaps weary of his parents' unspoken deceptions, hesitated for a moment. Then, looking down at his hands, he mumbled, "Yeah, Dad was always talking about how much they were making. He bought that new car, the fancy one, after saying the lake house income really helped them out. And that big trip to Europe last summer? He said it was all thanks to the smart investment by the lake." Each word from James's mouth was a nail in the coffin of my daughter's lies. The financial difficulties suddenly seemed a cruel joke. The temporary solution was a lucrative scheme. And my grandson, a bystander in their deceit, was now exposed to its ugly reality. The raw, desperate look on Sarah's face was not one of a wronged innocent, but of a cornered schemer. "James, that's enough." Sarah shrieked, her composure completely shattered. "You don't know what you're talking about. Go to your room." But James, for the first time, didn't immediately obey. He looked at me, then at his mother, his young face etched with confusion and a dawning understanding. He saw the truth, or at least a large part of it, unfolding before his eyes. The easy smiles, the expensive lifestyle, the hushed conversations, it all began to make sense, in a terrifying, disappointing way. I put my hand on James's arm, a silent message of support. He flinched, then leaned slightly into my touch. The family skeletons were tumbling out of the closet, not quietly, but with a resounding crash. And one of the most painful realizations was that this deception had not just affected me, but had tainted my grandson, forcing him to witness the unraveling of his parents' integrity. The betrayal was deeper, wider, than I had ever imagined. James's unwitting revelations had shattered whatever fragile pretense Sarah still clung to. He mumbled an apology and retreated to his room, leaving an even heavier silence in his wake. Sarah sat across from me, her face a contorted mask of fury and humiliation. Her eyes, usually so calculating, now brimmed with a desperate, raw anger, directed entirely at me. "Are you happy now, Mom?" she hissed, her voice barely a whisper, yet laced with venom. "Are you happy you've ruined everything? Embarrassed me in front of my son? What do you want from me? My blood? Is that it?" Her words, intended to wound, only strengthened my resolve. The Sarah I knew, the daughter I loved, wouldn't have spoken like that. This was a desperate, cornered woman, stripped bare of her carefully constructed facade. "I want the truth, Sarah," I replied, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. "And I want justice. Not for my blood, as you so dramatically put it, but for my trust. For the years of lies. For stealing from me, not just financially, but emotionally." "It wasn't stealing," she retorted, her voice rising. "It was a loan. We were going to pay you back. You just don't understand how hard it is out there. We had debts, Mom. Big ones. Mark's business was failing. What else were we supposed to do?" "You could have come to me," I said, a wave of profound sadness washing over me. "You could have asked. I would have helped you, Sarah. I would have given you whatever I could. But you chose to deceive me. To treat me like a fool. To forge my name." She recoiled, as if the word forged were a physical blow. The anger momentarily drained from her face, replaced by a flicker of fear. She knew then that I understood the full extent of their crime. "Mom, please," she pleaded, her voice suddenly soft, manipulative. The tears returned, real this time, though I doubted their sincerity. "Don't do anything rash. Think of James. Think of our family. This will ruin us. Please, let's just keep it between us. We'll find a way to pay you back. I promise. We'll give you the house. Just not now. We need more time." I looked at her, truly looked at her. I saw the fear, yes, but beneath it, the ingrained selfishness, the readiness to manipulate, to play on my maternal affection. This wasn't a one-time mistake, it was a pattern. How many times had I overlooked similar small betrayals, dismissed them as youthful indiscretions, only for them to escalate into this monumental deception? My heart was a battlefield. On one side, the aching desire to protect my child, to preserve the illusion of a family, to avoid the painful, public confrontation. On the other, a fierce, burning need for honesty, for respect, for my own dignity. To let this go, to forgive and forget, would be to condone their actions, to allow them to continue believing they could walk all over me. It would mean living with a lie, a bitterness that would poison my remaining years. I called Claire again, that evening, my voice tired but steady. I recounted the entire, agonizing conversation, including James's accidental reveal. Claire listened without interruption, her silence a comforting presence. When I finished, she sighed. "Ellie," she said softly, "I told you. You're at war. And it sounds like your daughter isn't just a misguided child anymore. She's an adult who made a choice. A very bad choice. And she and Mark have been living off that choice for years. But what do I do, Claire?" I whispered, the dilemma tearing at my soul. "She's my daughter. My only child. How can I go against her? How can you not?" Claire countered gently. "Ellie, you're a good woman. You taught those kids for 40 years, instilled values in them. You've always stood for what's right. If you let this slide, what does that make you? A doormat? An enabler? Is that the legacy you want to leave for James? He saw what happened today, Ellie. He saw their truth. Now he needs to see your strength." Her words resonated deeply. Claire, with her blunt honesty, had articulated the unspoken truth gnawing at me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about James, about the moral compass I had always tried to embody. If I allowed this injustice to stand, what message would I be sending him? That deception pays? That family ties trump all morality? "Sometimes, Ellie," Claire continued, her voice softer now, "the hardest decisions are the ones that hurt the most. But they're also the ones that define you. You deserve the truth, and they deserve to face the consequences. For yourself, and for that grandson of yours who needs to see an example of courage." I hung up the phone, the decision slowly solidifying in my mind, cold and hard as stone. The illusion of my family, of my relationship with Sarah, was already shattered. There was no going back to the way things were. Forgiveness, in this instance, would not be an act of love, but an act of self-betrayal. The path ahead was frightening, fraught with conflict and pain. It meant tearing open old wounds, exposing ugly truths to the light. It meant risking the complete severing of my relationship with Sarah. But looking at the forged signature, at the calculated lies, I knew I had no other choice. My quiet life had been turned upside down, but from the wreckage, a new, stronger Eleanor was emerging. One who, despite her years, was ready to fight for her truth. The following days were a whirlwind of quiet, determined action. The initial shock and hurt had solidified into a calm, unwavering resolve. Claire's words had been a catalyst, pushing me past the paralysis of betrayal into a clear, albeit painful, path forward. I was no longer just an old woman grieving a lost ideal. I was Eleanor Vance, a former teacher who knew the value of justice and the consequences of deceit. My first call, after Claire, was to a local attorney specializing in property and family law. A friend of Claire's, apparently, named Mr. Henderson. He was a kind-faced man with a sharp mind, and as I laid out my story, presenting the printed documents, his initial professional demeanor shifted to one of genuine concern. He confirmed my worst fears. The power of attorney was almost certainly fraudulent, making the transfer of the property null and void. We had a strong case, he assured me, but it would be emotionally taxing. I told him I was ready. The meeting with Sarah and Mark was arranged for a Tuesday afternoon, not in my cozy kitchen, but in Mr. Henderson's office. A neutral, professional ground, where their theatrics would be less effective. The air was thick with unspoken tension as they walked in, Sarah still radiating an aura of brittle defiance, Mark with his practiced, charming smile, which seemed to falter slightly under the lawyer's stern gaze. James, to my surprise and apprehension, accompanied them, sitting quietly in a corner chair, his eyes wide and watchful. Sarah had likely brought him to play on my sympathies, a final, desperate gambit. "Eleanor," Mark began, attempting his usual easy charm, "it's good to see you. We really appreciate you bringing us all together to clear up this misunderstanding." His attempt at casualness was jarring. I merely nodded, my gaze unwavering. Mr. Henderson, a man of few wasted words, cut to the chase. "Mr. and Mrs. Middleton," he stated, his voice calm but authoritative, "Mrs. Vance has presented me with documents indicating a highly questionable transfer of property, specifically the lake house in Lake Middleton. These documents include a power of attorney that Mrs. Vance denies ever signing, and a subsequent deed transfer based on that power of attorney." Sarah's face, which had been carefully composed, now paled. Mark's smile vanished, replaced by a tight, grim line. "Questionable," Sarah interjected, her voice sharp. "My mother signed those papers. She's simply forgotten. It's her age, Mr. Henderson. She's a little confused sometimes." She shot me a glance, filled with a mix of warning and feigned concern. "I am not confused, Sarah," I said, my voice cutting through hers with an unexpected strength that even surprised myself. "I have not forgotten. And I did not sign that power of attorney." Mr. Henderson held up a copy of the document. The signature, while bearing a resemblance, shows inconsistencies when compared to other verified signatures of Mrs. Vance. Furthermore, Mrs. Vance unequivocally states she was never informed of this power of attorney, nor did she ever intend to relinquish control of any property to you. Mark finally spoke, his voice losing its charm, becoming clipped and defensive. "This is preposterous. We were simply managing the property for Eleanor. It was an investment strategy for her future, a way to help her out. She consented to everything. Consented to having the property transferred into your names and then collecting substantial rental income from it for 3 years, while she remained entirely unaware of its existence?" Mr. Henderson inquired, his tone deceptively mild. The color drained from Mark's face. Sarah's eyes darted nervously to James, who was now staring intently at his parents, his jaw slightly agape. "The rental income was to cover expenses," Sarah stammered, her voice cracking. "Maintenance, taxes. It's expensive to run a lake house, Mom." "Indeed," Mr. Henderson said dryly. "But the figures we've obtained suggest a significant profit, not just mere coverage of expenses. And no part of this profit, or even the intent to repay, was ever communicated to Mrs. Vance." He then laid out my demand, calmly and methodically. I wanted the property returned to my name, free and clear, and I wanted compensation for the years of rental income they had collected. If they refused, I was prepared to pursue legal action, including potential charges for fraud and forgery. The office descended into chaos. Sarah erupted first, her carefully constructed facade crumbling completely. "You can't do this, Mom," she shrieked, tears springing to her eyes, real tears of rage and fear. "You'll ruin us. You'll ruin Mark's business. You'll destroy our family. How could you be so cruel?" Mark joined in, his face red with indignation. "This is blackmail, Eleanor. After everything we've done for you. We supported you. We bought you groceries. This is how you repay us." Their accusations, their attempts to shift blame, were a desperate flurry of blows. But I stood firm, my gaze meeting theirs without flinching. The woman who had once avoided confrontation, who had swallowed her pain for the sake of peace, was gone. In her place was someone who had finally found her voice, her resolve. "You speak of ruining the family, Sarah?" I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "You ruined it the moment you forged my name. You ruined it the moment you decided to lie, to deceive, to steal. I am not destroying our family. I am trying to salvage what little truth is left." Then I turned my gaze to James. His eyes, full of shock and confusion, met mine. He had seen it all. The anger, the fear, the raw desperation of his parents. And in my steady gaze, I hoped he saw not cruelty, but strength. The strength of a woman finally standing up for herself. "You have a choice," Mr. Henderson concluded, his voice cutting through their dwindling protests. "You can resolve this amicably, or we can take this to court. The evidence is clear. The decision is yours." Sarah crumpled into her chair, sobbing openly, no longer trying to hide her distress. Mark stared at the papers, then at me, a flicker of something that looked like grudging respect, or perhaps just fear, in his eyes. The mask had not just slipped, it had shattered into irreparable pieces. The storm had broken, and I, Eleanor Vance, stood at its center, unbowed. The silence that followed Mr. Henderson's ultimatum was heavy, punctuated only by Sarah's ragged sobs and the distant hum of city traffic. Mark, for the first time since this whole nightmare began, looked utterly defeated. His usual bravado had evaporated, leaving behind a man stripped of his easy charm, exposed and vulnerable. James, still in his corner chair, watched the scene unfold with an almost clinical detachment, his young face a canvas of disbelief and pain. He had, in one afternoon, witnessed the total collapse of his parents' carefully constructed image. Mr. Henderson gave them a moment, allowing the weight of the situation to settle. Then he calmly reiterated the terms, offering a path to avoid public litigation if they agreed to return the property and compensate for the rental income. Sarah continued to weep, burying her face in her hands, while Mark, after a long, agonizing pause, finally nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his head. He exchanged a quick, desperate glance with Sarah, a silent concession of defeat. We'll agree to your terms, Eleanor," Mark said, his voice hoarse, devoid of its usual resonance. "We'll sign whatever needs to be signed. Just, no charges. Please, think of James." The irony was not lost on me. He pleaded for James, the very person they had so carelessly exposed to their deceit. But the fight had taken its toll, and a part of me simply wanted the legal battle to be as swift and private as possible. I looked at Mr. Henderson, who gave a slight, affirming nod. "We will proceed with the civil resolution," I stated, my voice steady. "But I expect full transparency and no further attempts at deception." The next few weeks were a painful blur of legal appointments, signatures, and formal transfers. The lake house, the phantom property that had cast such a long shadow over my life, was legally returned to my name. The financial compensation for the rental income was also settled, a sum that felt less like a victory and more like a bitter accounting for lost trust. Each step of the process was a reminder of Sarah's betrayal, a fresh twist of the knife in an already wounded heart. Sarah and Mark's initial reaction oscillated between sullen resentment and desperate attempts to appeal to my pity. Sarah called me multiple times, her voice varying from tearful apologies to sharp accusations of ruthlessness. "You've ruined us, Mom. Mark's reputation is in tatters. How can you sleep at night?" she would wail. I learned to keep my responses brief, factual, and devoid of emotion. The maternal bond, once so vibrant and strong, had frayed beyond repair. It was a wound that would likely never fully heal. The most profound and unexpected consequence of this entire ordeal, however, was my relationship with James. In the wake of the meeting at Mr. Henderson's office, he had become quieter, more withdrawn than ever. I half expected him to resent me for exposing his parents, for disrupting their lives. But instead, a different dynamic began to emerge. A few days after the settlement was finalized, James called me. His voice was hesitant, almost shy. "Grandma," he started, can I come over? Just to talk." My heart ached for him. He was a good boy, caught in the crossfire of his parents' greed. "Of course, dear," I replied, a warmth spreading through me that I hadn't felt in weeks. "My door is always open for you." He arrived later that afternoon, looking pale and subdued. He didn't come with his parents, nor did he mention them. We sat in my living room, the same room where Sarah had dropped her bombshell on Thanksgiving Day. He spoke quietly, slowly, expressing his confusion, his disappointment. "I don't understand, Grandma," he confessed, his eyes wide and vulnerable. "Why did they do it? Why did they lie to you? And to me?" I explained it to him as gently as I could, talking about choices, about the temptations of money, and about the importance of honesty, even when it's difficult. I didn't demonize his parents, but I didn't sugarcoat their actions either. I simply stated the facts, letting him draw his own conclusions. He listened intently, nodding occasionally. He told me about the new car, the European trip, the seemingly endless stream of expensive gifts. He had seen the disconnect between their declared financial difficulties and their lavish spending, but had simply accepted his parents' explanations. Now he understood the truth. He felt the weight of their deceit, not just on me, but on him too. I always thought they were perfect, he said, his voice barely audible. Successful. Smart. But this. He trailed off, shaking his head. Nobody's perfect, James, I told him, reaching across to gently take his hand. His fingers were cold. We all make mistakes. But true strength, true character, is about owning those mistakes and learning from them. He looked at me, a glimmer of something new in his eyes, not just sadness, but a budding understanding and, perhaps, a quiet respect. He saw the strength I had found, the resolve to stand for what was right, even when it meant confronting my own child. In that moment, a new bond began to form between us, forged not in the easy warmth of family celebration, but in the crucible of shared truth and hard-won honesty. The old family was broken, but something new, something more real, was beginning to emerge from its shards. The lake house, now officially mine, sat silent and remote. I had no desire to visit it, much less live in it. It was a beautiful property I saw from the online listings Mark had so enthusiastically used for rentals, but it carried the indelible stain of betrayal. Instead, the money from the compensation, a substantial sum, rested in a separate account, a tangible reminder of the price of truth. It wasn't about wealth, it was about the principle, the reclamation of something stolen, not just financially, but spiritually. My life, once so quiet and predictable, had been irrevocably altered. The comfort of my old home remained, but the sense of security that had once enveloped my family relationships was gone. Sarah and Mark had retreated into a sullen silence after the legal proceedings. The occasional, terse phone call from Sarah, usually laced with thinly veiled resentment or requests for further understanding, was met with polite but firm boundaries. The maternal heart that once bled for her now held a protective, almost hardened, shell. The unconditional love I had always felt had been tested and found conditional, on honesty, on respect, on basic human decency. But amidst the wreckage, a new, unexpected light had emerged. James. My grandson became a frequent visitor, seeking solace and understanding away from the tense atmosphere of his own home. He would arrive with school books, or sometimes just to sit and talk, sharing his thoughts on the books he was reading, his struggles with calculus, his dreams for college. He was processing his parents' actions, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, thoughtful disillusionment. He saw their flaws, not through my lens of pain, but through his own developing sense of right and wrong. One crisp autumn afternoon, as we sat on the porch, watching the last leaves drift from the maple tree, James confessed, "Grandma, I almost lost respect for you when you went through with this. I thought you were being mean. But then, I saw how they acted. And how you acted. You didn't yell. You didn't make a scene. You just stood up for yourself. And that's important, isn't it?" I looked at him, his young face earnest and thoughtful. "It is, James," I said softly, laying a hand on his arm. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself, and even for others, is to insist on the truth. Even when it hurts. He nodded, a profound understanding dawning in his eyes. Our bond, once easy and familial, had deepened into something richer, built on a foundation of shared vulnerability and mutual respect. He was seeing the world with clearer eyes, learning that integrity often came at a cost, but that the price was worth paying. The money from the lake house settlement remained untouched for a while. I pondered its purpose, unwilling to let it simply vanish into everyday expenses. One day, while browsing through my old teaching supplies, an idea sparked. I decided to establish a scholarship fund in my late husband's name for promising students from our small town who needed financial assistance for college. It was a quiet act, a way to transform the bitter fruit of deception into something sweet and lasting. It felt right. It was a way to nurture growth, not greed. My hair grew a little grayer, my steps a little slower, but my spirit felt lighter, unburdened by the weight of unspoken truths and forced forgiveness. I had lost a certain idyllic image of my daughter, yes, and that grief would always linger. But I had gained something far more valuable, a renewed sense of self-worth, an unshakable belief in my own judgment, and a deeper, more honest connection with my grandson. I learned that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, but not always with the same people. I often sat by my window, watching the seasons turn, no longer haunted by the ghost of a house I never owned, but grateful for the home I truly had, within myself. The quiet life I had always cherished had been tumultuous, but it had carved out a new path, revealing a strength I never knew I possessed. The lake house never became my home. But I found something far more valuable, myself, my truth, and a quiet peace in this new, albeit challenging, reality.